Hello, and welcome to the conclusion of this week-long KRAD COVID readings event, in which I have been reading my novelette, Cayo Hueso, A Tale of Cassie Zukav, Weirdness Magnet. I am Keith R.A. DeCandido, helping cure the coronavirus blues by reading my writing. In this case, an urban fantasy novelette that was printed in RAGNAROK and ROLL, Tales of Cassie Zukav, Weirdness Magnet, and back in 2013, so it's available there. And I may be releasing it as a full novelette. I originally wrote it in 3 separate parts and published it as 3 ebooks, and then reprinted it in RAGNAROK and ROLL. The original ebooks are no longer available. But anyhow, this is the conclusion of the story. When last we left off, just as Mayor Fred's saloon was closing down, Loki stumbled in, looking like crap, as we will see shortly. I whirled around to see Loki stumbling into the bar. The clothes he was wearing were odd, to say the least. Flowing white robes and a large cape, and his hair was much wilder than before. He was also horribly beaten up, cuts and scrapes all over him. And then a second later, he looked like he normally did. Blonde hair, red goatee, and wearing the usual Key West outfit of t-shirt and shorts. But they were ripped too, and the cuts and scrapes hadn't changed. "Loki!" Ginny cried, jumping off the stage. Bobby and Jaina exchanged a glance. "What did she say?" Bobby asked. I decided to pretend I didn't hear that, especially since I was more worried about what did that to him. Ginny was on top of him before I could move, but the 3 of us went over to Sigurd right away. "I'm sorry. I didn't make..." Then he collapsed. As soon as he did, he was back to the white robes. "I don't believe it. The fucker cast a glamour even I couldn't see through." Odin shook his head. "It is not a glamour. Loki is a shapeshifter. We must bring him somewhere safe. Perhaps your abode?" "No!" I snapped. "My parents are there, not to mention a full house of guests. No fucking way we're taking this guy there." "We will remove him to my dwelling," Ginny said. I stared at her. I'd managed to never learn where it was she lived in the 7 months since I met her, so this came as something of a surprise. We propped him up in one of the chairs while the band got everything into Bobby's parents' cargo van. Chet wandered off with some white chick like he usually did. Seriously, every night he brought a different woman back to his boat, and it was almost always a white woman. If I sound stereotypical and or cynical, it came from watching this play out 4 nights a week for over a year. Chet was a fucking man-whore, and a lot of the women who came to the island, well, it was harder to get into community college than it was their pants, you know? Anyhow, we weren't getting any help from Chet, but what do you expect from a bass player? Once we loaded the gear, and Paul and I got Loki's unconscious form into the back of the van, we all clambered in. It being a cargo van, only Bobby and Jaina got to sit in the driver's seat and shotgun, respectively. Odin, Ginny, Paul, and I crammed ourselves in amidst the instruments in the cargo section. Ginny directed Bobby down Green to Elizabeth, down Elizabeth to Fleming, and left on Fleming. I asked, "What, you live by the cemetery?" Worryingly, Ginny didn't answer that question, just telling Bobby, "Turn right on Margaret." That brought us to the spot where Margaret turned into Passover Lane, right by the entrance to the Key West Cemetery. "Park anywhere here," Ginny said. Bobby turned around. "What the hell, Ginny?" Ginny sighed. "I'm not simply the ex-wife of Loki. I'm also the goddess of the earth nymphs. My home is not here, exactly. I need the earth to access it, and the cemetery is simply the nearest pure ground to Mayor Fred's." Reluctantly, Bobby parked the van. Luckily, there was a spot on the street in a residential parking area. Since the van had Monroe County plates, it would likely be safe. We pulled Loki out of the car. "We all have to stand on natural ground, dirt or grass." "Seriously?" Jaina just stared at her. "Just trust me, please." Jaina turned her stare to me. "This is the sort of shit you do all the time?" Lamely, I said, "Kind of." Once we all had our feet planted on cemetery ground, Ginny closed her eyes and her body tensed briefly. A second passed. Then 2. And then we were somewhere else. It looked like a cave, but it was well lit. From a light source I couldn't find, and with lots of beanbag-style furniture. Oh, and a big flat-screen TV mounted to one of the rock walls. Jaina looked around at the space, which had no doors or windows. "You fucking live here, Blake?" "Yes." Ginny pointed at one of the beanbag chairs. "Put him down there." Paul and I gently placed Loki down on it. Well, Paul was gentle. I would have been happy to just drop the son of a bitch to the floor. He moaned as we did so, which I took to be a good sign. "Yo, Loki, wake your ass up!" His eyes blinked open and he moaned again. "Where am I?" Ginny stepped forward. "You are in my dwelling, along with Bobby, Jaina, Cassie, the Allfather, and Cassie's brother." Loki smiled raggedly. So this is what it takes to get you to take me to your home. Before Ginny could reply to that, I stepped between them. Loki, I'm about 5 seconds from kicking you repeatedly in the balls. Start talking. I know you're the one who supercharged all the ghosts. Now he laughed, which was followed by a quick cough. The Dees does it again. Yes, I cast the spell that made the ghosts more active. Odin spoke up. Yet another attempt to bring about Ragnarok? Actually, no. Loki sat up now, and I noticed that his cuts were mostly healed. He was also speaking in close to his normal voice. I simply wish to give the people of this island a bit of more of a proper ghost experience. He grinned. Why should the Dees have all the fun? The mortals tell such ridiculous stories of ghosts, so why not give them something to really talk about? Jaina stared at him. Why the fuck would you do that? Not that I need to answer to you, minstrel, but why shouldn't I? Jerking a thumb at Loki, Jaina looked at Ginny. You were married to this asshole? Staring at her ex, Ginny set her face hard. It seemed like a good idea at the time. Still and all, Loki said quickly, I had no intention of making another attempt at Ragnarok. And then I met the Last Calusa. Simultaneously, Paul and I both said, the what? Bobby spoke up. The Calusa are the native people who lived in the Keys before the Spanish got here. By the 1800s, though, they all died out. They wouldn't trade with the Spanish, but their enemies did, and so they got wiped out by superior weapons. Indeed. Loki looked upon Bobby with something vaguely resembling surprise. Apparently, the last of them is one of the many spirits that wandered the island. But there was magic in that spirit I didn't recognize. So I approached it, realized how incredibly powerful it was, and endeavored to take its power for my own. And failed, I added. Yes, little Dees, I did. I winced. I'd threatened him with bodily harm if he ever called me that again, but looking at him, injured, weakened, looking like his normal self instead of this Sigurd Jarlsson persona, I wasn't sure what I could do to him at this point that the Last Calusa hadn't already done. The spirit managed instead, Loki continued, to take all my power for itself, leaving me drained and bloody. It couldn't kill me, of course, but it did trap me in a fishing net and throw me into the water. It took quite some time to swim back. Looks like you ripped your skin open on some coral, I said. Well, it couldn't happen to an ice. You do not understand, little Dees. From me, the spirit learned that it could consume other spirits as well. Soon it will be incredibly powerful. It told me it was going to spill the blood of its enemies. Bobby frowned. The Calusa's enemies were the Creek and the Yamasee. There aren't that many left around here. It's mostly Seminoles. The Creek moved west and the Yamasee died out too. Fuck, Jaina muttered. My parents were both part Muskogee. From sheer habit, I whipped out my smartphone, only to be stunned that I had 4 bars. Shooting Ginny a look of respect, I then went to my contact list. I'm calling Rance. I need to find out if the other victims are natives. First off, Jaina said, why the fuck would he tell you anything, Zukav? It ain't like you actually slept with the guy. He knows I'm a Dees. I spoke without thinking, belatedly remembering that Jaina had only known this for 24 hours. Fuck, did everyone know but me? She shook her head. Also, Dimitrijian ain't gonna answer the phone at 3:30 in the fucking... Hey, Rance, I said when he answered. I might also have stuck my tongue out at Jaina, who finished with a lame, morning. Cassie, I was just finally about to get to sleep. It has been a quite excruciatingly long day, and I really have a tremendous need. I need to know if the other victims of the disappearing fishing net killer had native blood. A pause. Cassie, I can't even confirm to you that there even are other victims. Rance, I need to know. It's important. Another pause. Is this... Yes, it's a Dees thing. Damn it. All right, look, Cassie, I have to be incredibly careful about this because this is considered a major case and I'm just consulting. It's truly KWPD's case. So I could get myself... Rance! All right. He sighed. There have been 8 victims so far. 6 have native blood, mostly Seminole or Muskogee. The other 2, though, are Spanish. Not Latin American, but from Spain. Yeah, that fits, I said. I'm sorry, Cassie, but on what planet does this sort of thing... I gotta go. I'll talk to you tomorrow, I promise. I ended the call. Rance was definitely going to have words with me the next time he saw me. And since Rance was a firm believer in using 5 sentences where one would do, he was going to have a lot of words. Jaina was fixing me with a nasty stare. So what the hell did Dimitrijian have to say at 3 a.m.? I told everyone what Rance told me. Ginny was the first to respond. We must cast a counterspell. Odin shook his head. It is not that simple. The Last Calusa is obviously a collective spirit of great power. By casting the spell he did, Loki made it even more powerful, and now it is wreaking havoc, destroying other spirits and mortal lives. A mere counterspell will be insufficient. Then what do we do? Ginny asked. Loki slowly got to his feet and stood unsteadily for a moment. There is only one thing to do. And then he looked right at me and Paul. What? I asked. We cannot ask them, Odin started, but Loki interrupted him. You were perfectly happy to ask that young woman to risk her life to stop me. With two of them here, the risk is far less. This was starting to piss me off. Risk of what? Odin turned to me and Paul. It is possible for the Disir to twist a being's fate. I blinked. Wait, we can really do that? I thought Odin was joking about that. It's not possible, Ginny said. It is possible, but very dangerous, Odin said. We were now well into the middle of pissing me off. If somebody doesn't start giving straight answers... Odin held up a hand. Twisting a being's fate is something that requires all three Disir in a set. My heart ached suddenly. That's going to be a problem. Paul's jaw fell open. You guys aren't going to make us fly to San Diego to dig up our brother's body, are you? Jaina stared at Paul like he'd grown another head. Dude, that's where you went? I was sadly not surprised, having grown up with him. I also now had the image of digging up the grave in question and was just nauseated. After 26 years, would anything even be left? That, Odin said dryly, will not be necessary. However, I believe that, among the three of us, we can provide the extra power that will be required. Loki raised a hand. Excuse me, but the three of us? I whirled on the toga-wearing bastard. Excuse me, Chuckles, but this was your fucking idea. What makes you think you get out of helping? It is not a question of desire, little Dees, but rather of capability. It is taking everything I have to maintain my mortal disguise. Bobby winced. About that? Not so much. Jaina grinned. Like the toga, though. Really hot. Looking down at himself, Loki noticed for the first time that he was in his true form. Hell's teeth. Well, that settles that, then. I've nothing to give. Odin regarded him with his one eye. You will try. Loki turned to his former wife. Sigyn, you explain to him what... Then he saw the look on Ginny's face. Very well, I shall try. Ginny's expression softened as she turned to Odin. The risk is still great. Paul's voice was softer than I'd ever heard it when he asked, Define great, please? You could both die, Odin said bluntly. I didn't even hesitate. And if we don't do it, how many more people die? Neither did my brother, blessed him. He moved to stand next to me. Why are we even still talking about it? What do we have to do? The first thing we have to do, Ginny said, is leave here. If I am to provide magical assistance, I must absorb the power of my current home. She sighed. I will miss this place. I frowned. Where will you live after this? Ginny smiled wryly. Assuming we all survive, I will simply have the earth nymphs construct me a new dwelling, but it will take some time. A nanosecond later, we were all back in the cemetery. Jaina shuddered and pulled out a cigarette. That's some fucked up shit right there. Staring at Bobby and Jaina, Odin said, You mortal women will be required as well. No, I said. Odin, you can't. I must, Odin said emphatically. The spell will place all five of us in a trance-like state. Our physical forms will be vulnerable. Barbara and Jane Ann must guard us against harm. Puffing on her cigarette, Jaina said, Call me Jane Ann again, and I use my Siggy to see how deep that eye socket goes. Understood. Odin stepped away. I will seek out this Last Calusa. Loki, you will assist. I told you, Allfather. Ow! That last word came when Odin grabbed Loki by the arm and dragged him away. Ginny, meanwhile, had her eyes closed and started muttering an incantation that sounded somewhat familiar. Paul looked at me. You recognize that language, don't you? It is impossible to have a poker face with your twin brother. Sort of. I mean, I don't know what any of it translates into English as, but I know the language from the counterspell I cast against Loki to keep him from ending the world. Jaina was staring at us. So let me see if I got this straight, Zukav. That asshole was both Sig and Gunnar? And if you hadn't stopped his band that night when it snowed, the world would have ended? I nodded. Fuck me backwards. That's some serious shit there. She took another puff on her cigarette. I may need one of those before this is over, Bobby muttered. I can't believe this is happening. I mean, we're talking about... What the hell are we talking about? Ultimately, I sighed, what we're talking about stopping a murderer. The rest of it is just window dressing. Then I chuckled mirthlessly. At least that's how I get through this shit. Listen, you two don't have to... Yes, we do. Bobby said. That thing is killing people. Including my parents, Jada added. Didn't like the fuckers all that much, but they were still my parents. She took a final drag of her cigarette and tossed it aside. Besides, I still owe you for saving my ass from marrying Russ. So we're doing this, and you can shut the fuck up about being noble and shit, alright? I shook my head and chuckled. Alright. Paul had his head in his hands, and I noticed tears welling up in his eyes. Paul? I asked, putting a hand on his arm. What's wrong? Besides the obvious? He managed to smile at that. No, I really don't want to die, Cassie. I just figured out who I am, what I am. Besides, if we die doing this, then I'll never get to apologize to Mom and Dad. For a few seconds, I stared at him. Then, rearing back, I hit his arm as hard as I could. Ow! What was that for? He stared at me with annoyance, rubbing his arm. You spent all fucking day with them. It would have killed you to say I'm sorry? I was waiting for the right moment. He sounded pathetic saying it, and based on the sheepish look on his face, he knew it. Well, wait a sec. Shouldn't we know what happens? I mean, we can tell the future, so why can't we... But Paul was shaking his head slowly. We can see other people's future, Cass, not our own. Well, that sucks. Until today, I wouldn't have agreed with you. Odin and Loki came back. We have located the Last Calusa. He is quite powerful, and we must move swiftly before there are more deaths. Where is he? I asked. Odin hesitated. The inn where you live. My stomach was doing flips. The beers I'd had at Mayor Fred's started to well up in the back of my throat. Mom and Dad. Paul's voice was a throaty whisper. I finally found my voice. And the captain. He may need another ghost to suck up. I clenched a fist. I'm fucked if he's doing that to my roommate. Let's go. My smartphone insisted it took less than 3 minutes to drive down Margaret to Eaton and down Eaton to the Bottroff house. It felt more like 3 hours. Or maybe 3 years. Or maybe just the rest of my life. Bobby pulled into the driveway behind Rocinante. Technically, it was blocking the sidewalk, but under the circumstances, a parking ticket was the least of our problems. There was no sign of anything wrong. The B&B was deathly quiet, as it generally was after midnight when the front door was locked, and before 5 when Debbie showed up to make breakfast. The entire gaggle of us, 2 Desir, 3 gods, 2 musicians, moved as quietly as 7 people could through a garden. When we came inside of my cottage, my heart rate went up. I always turned everything off when I left the room, but there was light coming from my windows. I whispered to Odin, how close do we need to get? Your patio should suffice. 7 people moved even less quietly up a wooden staircase than they did across a garden. I was stunned that the entire clientele of the B&B didn't come out to find out why a stampede of elephants was coming through. I was first up the stairs. I peeked through the window. Behind me, Odin, Loki, and Ginny had begun muttering an incantation. I didn't really pay close attention to what they were doing. I wanted to see what we were up against. The first thing I saw was the captain, but he looked, well, stuck. Normally he kind of floated around the room, but now he was utterly immobile. Honestly, I hadn't even realized how much he moved until that moment when he couldn't. He also looked really pissed. The other guy in the room was taller than the captain and damn well built. I could see almost all of him, as the only parts of his bronzed body that were actually covered were his naughty bits by a small leather loincloth, which was bound at the waist by a belt decorated with, I kid you not, human bones, fingers and toes mostly, with a skull right at the center. I also couldn't see his face. He wore a wood mask decorated with a really elaborate, and I gotta say, really cool design of red and white and black. His arms were raised, and it sounded like he was chanting something. Probably the spell that was going to cost Captain Bottroff his unlife. Over my dead body. Possibly literally. Paul was standing next to me, also looking into the window. That is a really cool mask. I was thinking the same thing, but I still snapped at him. Focus, Pinky, that's the bad guy. Yeah. So how do we... And then all of a sudden, the porch was no longer under our feet. Neither was anything else. The world shifts and changes all around Cassie and Paul. Together they float through the air with the porch of the cottage at the Bottroff House bed and breakfast below them. But also beneath them is the garden as it was before Debbie Delamonica bought it and turned it into a B&B, adding the 2 cottages in the back. But also beneath them is the empty lot it was before Captain Bottroff bought it and constructed the cottage. But also beneath them is the grassland occupied by the Calusa. But also beneath them is a pathway used by the Spanish and Bahamian fishers on their way to and from the sea. Paul and Cassie float together, their movements in perfect concert. A blue thread connects them with a third blue thread that remains just out of sight. No matter how many times either of them turn to look at the thread, they can never see where it leads. Cassie's room in the cottage, also an empty space, also a huge building. is below, and she and Paul see the Last Calusa. White threads stretch away from him. Paul looks to see where the white threads lead, and so does Cassie when he does. The threads go back to another island in the Keys, but also straight to the 18th century. 250 years of nothing, and then a tall man wearing a loincloth very much like that of the ghost, though with animal bones around the waist instead of human ones. He wears a mask of blue and white and red, with an open mouth. The voice of Odin whispers in Paul and Cassie's ear, telling them that this was the chief priest of the Calusa, and the open mouth represents his ability to speak to the three gods. The voice of Loki mutters that he met the Calusa's three gods once, and found them humorless and annoying, rather like Thor, but without the bombast. Sigyn points out that all Thor is bombast, to which Loki says that's the point. There is a boy with the chief priest wearing a mask of red and black and white. Priest and boy chant and dance in a circle, each moving 3 times, one for each god. Paul and Cassie, the priest holds 2 daggers, while the boy holds a 3rd. After 3 circles, the priest and the boy each lunge for each other. Paul jumps in shock, but Cassie understands that this was the creation of the Last Calusa. The spirit, created by the dying act of the chief priest and the boy, bided its time for 2.5 centuries, waiting for the right moment. They follow the white threads back to the present, the Last Calusa standing in front of Captain Bottroff, who has white threads behind him, but no threads in front of him, which worries Cassie and therefore also worries Paul. Red threads stretch forward from the front of the Last Calusa, showing hundreds and hundreds of dead bodies, and a Key West that has no more ghosts, except for one. Paul looks at Cassie. Cassie looks at Paul. Cassie reaches for the white threads, but they will not move. Odin says they cannot change the past. Paul knows that they must change the future, not the past. Cassie knows that they must act quickly before they lose Captain Bottroff. Cassie and Paul both reach for the red threads, and they scream together, their cries of agony echoing through time. Cassie feels the white-hot pain slicing through Paul's arm, and Paul feels the burning sensation on Cassie's hands, and they both let go. The voice of the Last Calusa is deep and resonant, the sound of hundreds speaking as one. You will not interfere. We have to interfere, Paul and Cassie speak as one also. You're killing people. Of course. We are a spirit of vengeance, and long have we awaited our time to reawaken. The outsiders with their foul diseases and their absurd religion. The Creek and the Yamasee, once respected foes who consorted with the outsiders and took their weapons. Once the Calusa were mighty, for our weapons were made of the shells from the sea. But the metal shells of the outsiders were stronger, and we were defeated. Cassie and Paul move between the Last Calusa and Captain Bottroff, and also simultaneously flank the spirit. None of those people had anything to do with that. It was hundreds of years ago. You have to stop. The 3 gods have blessed our endeavor, providing us with the outsider god who showed us how to take the spirits of others. Paul points at Captain Bottroff, even as Cassie's voice comes to the fore. The spirit you're trying to take now is my friend. We won't let you destroy him. He is already dead and dust. So are you! What gives you the right to carry out your vengeance at his expense? His reflection and shadow have moved on, leaving his eye-soul trapped in this place. We will free it, as we did the others, and use them for our grand purpose. Not if we stop you. Loki tells them that now is the time. Cassie and Paul hold hands and reach together for the red threads. They have stalled long enough, their godly backing providing extra strength, and it is time to try again. With all 4 hands, the 2 together and the 2 separate, the twins grab the red string. They concentrate. They focus. The red string turns black. The Last Calusa screams with the voice of thousands, reaching not only through time, but through all the 9 worlds. There is a blinding flash of light. And then we were back in the real world, about 8 feet over the porch. Fuck! My arms flailing, I fell to the porch in bone-jarring agony, my left shoulder wrenching really badly as I landed right on it. From a few feet away, I heard a blood-curdling scream. Paul had landed on Bobby, and the 2 were all tangled up. The scream was Bobby's. She sounded like she was in as much pain as we felt when we first grabbed the red string. Clutching my shoulder, I clambered to my feet. Jaina was kneeling next to Bobby while my brother disentangled himself from her. Every move he made caused her to wince or scream. What is it? Jaina asked. Leg! Bobby said through gritted teeth. Hurts like fuck! Oh, Father! Whirling, I saw Ginny and Loki running to Odin, who had collapsed onto the porch. What the hell's going on? That was Dad, who had run out along with Mom. They were both completely naked, which was a sight I never, ever, ever needed to see. We kind of saved the world again, Dad. I ran across the porch to see how Odin was. Call 911, would you please? And, put some clothes on, maybe? Right! He ran back inside and Mom followed, covering herself once she belatedly realized she had forgotten to toss a robe on. I knelt down next to Ginny and Loki over Odin. The Allfather of the Aesir was fading fast, and I meant that literally. He was turning transparent before our very eyes. Odin, what's... Last Calusa, he muttered. Gone forever. Well done, Cassie. He stopped breathing and closed his eye. And then he faded away. I stared at the empty space where he had been and turned to Ginny. Is he dead? It is difficult to say, Ginny finally said. Allfather, Loki added, has been dead before. But that was when the Aesir were at the height of their powers. Of course, in these times, we would have crushed this upstart ghost. Loki, Ginny said gently, putting a hand on his. Of course. Mom and Dad came back out, this time in bathrobes, thank goodness. Ambulance is on the way. Good. Jaina was holding her best friend's hand, because Bobby's in bad shape. Paul was on the other side of Bobby, looking miserable. Bobby, I'm so sorry. It's okay, she said, teeth still clenched. She was sweating even more than she did when she would perform, which I wouldn't have believed possible. Wouldn't have missed that for nothing. That was fucking awesome. It is well that you arrived when you did. I jerked my head around and saw that Captain Bottroff had materialized on the porch, as if enough wasn't happening. He looked, well, normal, which was actually a good thing. Another few moments, and we would no longer be enjoying each other's company. You're welcome, Cap. Jaina stared at me. Who are you talking to, Zukav? I exchanged a look with Paul, who shrugged. I realized that we'd really done it. The Last Calusa was gone, which meant that things were back to normal on the island. Well, as normal as we get around here. The ambulance took Bobby away, Jaina not leaving her side, and by that time everyone in the damn B&B was up. Of course, by then it was after 5, and Debbie had come in, and we spent the rest of the night and the early morning talking to the paramedics and to Debbie and to the cops. Even Rance came by, as he hadn't been able to get to sleep after I called. It was a huge mess. Somewhere in there, Loki and Ginny disappeared, but more subtly, not the way Odin did. And somewhere else in there, I managed to call Eclipse and tell them I couldn't do any dives on Monday. And then Paul and I went into my room at about 9 in the morning and collapsed, not waking up for another 14 hours or so. Thanksgiving at the Malevsky house was amazing. Yes, I'm jumping ahead. We slept away all of Monday, and Tuesday and Wednesday were a blur of exhaustion. Changing the fate of the collective spirit of an entire tribe of native people turned out to be pretty goddamn tiring. And I had to run a bunch of dives over those days since Eclipse was overbooked, and I had to make up the time I missed on Monday. Jaina wound up missing her appointment to ID her parents' bodies Monday morning. She refused to leave Bobby's side until she was released from the hospital, even though there was a steady stream of family and friends coming by. They let Bobby out in time for Thanksgiving, but she was on crutches, just like I'd foreseen. My parents and I crammed into the Rocinante. It was an old truck that only had a single bench seat in front that barely fit 3, while Paul followed on Comet as we drove to the house on Cow Key where the Malevsky clan lived. Walking around to the back, we saw the party in full swing when we got there at noon. Which, by the way, was when we were told to be there, but there was this sea of blonde-haired people everywhere. Others arrived right behind us, and it hit me that this was just the immediate family who'd been here when we arrived. The blondes got a bit more diluted at that point. Their backyard was filled with dark wooden picnic tables that Bobby's father joked about having stolen from parks all over the country. At the center table was Bobby, Jaina by her side, left leg covered from knee to foot in plaster, crutches leaning against the bench next to her. "Hey, Cass," she said brightly as we approached. "You're in a good mood," I said with a ragged smile. "It's Thanksgiving," she grinned, "and I'm on the good drugs." "Chased with beer," Jaina added, grabbing Bobby's empty plastic cup. "Speaking of which, you need another." "I really don't, Jaina." She put a hand on Jaina's shoulder to keep her from getting up. "Let me get some of Grandpa's turkey in me before I drink any more, okay?" "Yo," came a voice from behind us. I turned to see Chet with a beautiful chocolate-skinned woman on his arm. "Chet brought a date," I said with a certain amount of surprise. "Of course I brought a date. You think I am bringing my girlfriend to Thanksgiving?" "This is your girlfriend." I shouldn't have sounded as shocked as I did, but then I remembered how he tended to end every night. Chet introduced the girlfriend, whose name was Baholi, and we all introduced each other. Baholi looked at Chet. "I'm going to get something to drink. You want anything?" Shrugging, Chet said, "Just a beer." "What kind?" He tilted his head. "You know what I like, baby. Corona." She raised an eyebrow. I thought you said you wanted beer. Her eyes twinkled at him, and she walked off. I like her, I said with a grin. Yeah, because your approval was keeping me up nights, Chet said with a snort. I thought you only dated white women, I said, remembering the skin color of every single woman he went home with after a gig. No, I only fuck white women. I only date black women. And before you get all self-righteous and shit, Maholi knows all about how I spend my gig nights. That ain't when we see each other. I held up both hands. I wasn't going to get self-righteous. Your problem, not mine. Ain't a problem at all. He sat next to Bobby. How's the leg? Broken, Bobby said with a chuckle. But we're back on stage tomorrow night regardless. How are you going to do that? Mom asked, incredulous. But Paul and I just exchanged smiles. We'd both seen premonitions of Bobby performing on stage with 1812 while sitting on a stool. I was almost kind of sort of starting to get used to seeing glimpses of the future. Of course, right after that, I got a flash of how Chet and Maholi were spending their night, an image I will likely spend the rest of my life trying and failing to scrub from my brain. I'm sorry we won't get to see it. We're flying back tomorrow morning, Paul said, and I'm going with them. I blinked. What? Well, not actually going with them because I can't bring Comet onto the plane. Plus, I need to head back to Charlotte to finish off some stuff and then drive out there. But I should be back in La Jolla by the time you light the menorah. Dad stared at Mom. We even know where the menorah is? I rolled my eyes. Well, good. I'm glad. Not nearly as glad as I am, Mom said emphatically. I'm so glad we came. Well, except for the part where I got manhandled by a crappy writer anyhow, Dad added. Mom smacked him on the arm for that. The point is, this is the best Thanksgiving I could have asked for. I'm finally getting my son home again. To my relief, Mom didn't emphasize my son in a way that made me feel guilty about not coming back with them. I think she finally got that I was staying here. Mom, Dad, Paul said, I'm sorry. Really. I wish I'd known. Dad held up a hand. It's okay. You know now. That's what matters. The afternoon continued from there, with me introducing Paul and my parents to all the various Malevsky and Malevsky hangers-on, food being brought out in droves to the picnic tables, alcohol of various sorts flowing freely, and a good time being had by all. At one point, me, Ginny, Loki, and Paul were sitting at one of the tables. The one oddity today had been Loki, who'd been very subdued. At least he looked like Sigurd Jarlsson again. What's wrong, Sig? I asked. Sorry you can't use the ghosts of Key West to end the world this time? Loki just stared at me angrily. Oh, don't give me that look. Tell me you weren't thinking about that. I wasn't, as it happens, he said in as soft a voice as I'd heard him use since he was pretending to be Gunnar Rickardsson and leading the band Jotunheim. I'm saddened by the loss of my blood brother. That deflated me something fierce. Yeah. I raised a bottle of amber beer. I had no idea of the brand, as it had been in a plastic tub filled with ice that had melted, so the label was long gone. To Odin. He was a crappy teacher and an annoying mentor, and he usually only showed up when all hell was breaking loose. But he was all right. To Odin, Paul said, while Ginny and Loki both said, Skull! We clinked our various drinks together and gulped down. Eventually, Bobby's parents brought all the turkeys out, there were 3, and we all gobbled it up. Sorry. I looked around at all the people, including me and my brother and my parents, all together for the first time in years. We just saved Key West from Loki being an asshole, again, and things were looking good. I had a lot to be thankful for. Mom was right. This was the best Thanksgiving. The end. You can find Cayo Hueso in the collection RAGNAROK and ROLL, Tales of Cassie Zukav, Weirdness Magnet, published by Plus One Press. You can find me online at DeCandido.net. You can find my blog at DeCandido.wordpress.com, and you can support me on Patreon at patreon.com/KRAD. Next week will be more stories, because there's always more stories. And please, I'll see you next week, and stay safe.